I still remember the day my sink decided to give up on me. I'm Jake, 28, living in a modest apartment in Seattle that's usually my pride and joy, except when things break down. That particular Tuesday, I woke up to the sound of dripping that quickly escalated into a concerning gurgle. When I walked into the kitchen, I discovered a small lake forming under my sink cabinet. Just perfect. I'm usually the type who can handle minor repairs, but plumbing has always been my nemesis. Something about pipes and water pressure just never clicked in my brain. Plus, I've been feeling particularly lonely that week. My best friend had just moved across the country for a job opportunity, and my dating life had been a wasteland of ghosted conversations and awkward coffee meetups that led nowhere. So there I was, standing in my kitchen, watching water slowly destroy my cabinets, feeling overwhelmingly defeated by both my appliances and my social life. I did what any reasonable adult would do. I Googled emergency plumber near me while sopping up water with every towel I owned. After a few calls to plumbers who couldn't come until sometime next week, I stumbled upon a listing for Mike's Handy Services. No job too small, same-day appointments available. The reviews were stellar, with several people specifically mentioning how he'd saved them from flooding disasters. I dialed the number, expecting another answering machine. Instead, a warm, deep voice answered. Mike's Handy Services, this is Mike. How can I help you today? There was something immediately disarming about his tone. Confident but not cocky, friendly but professional. I explained my sink situation with probably too much panic in my voice, and he chuckled. Not in a dismissive way, but in that reassuring manner that says, I've seen worse, and this is totally fixable. He told me he could be at my place in about an hour if that worked for me. I nearly cried with relief. Let me explain why this quick response mattered so much. When you're standing in a puddle of water that's threatening to ruin your flooring, an hour feels like salvation compared to next week. Plus, there was something oddly comforting about knowing someone capable was on their way to help. I spent that hour cleaning up as much water as possible and, I'll admit, tidying up my apartment more thoroughly than was strictly necessary for a plumbing repair. I even changed into a cleaner t-shirt, which I told myself was just about looking presentable and not at all about the friendly voice on the phone. The doorbell rang exactly 58 minutes after our call, punctuality that already impressed me. But nothing prepared me for Mike himself. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a man about my age, maybe a year or two older, with the kind of smile that immediately puts you at ease. He stood about 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, filling out a simple gray t-shirt that had his company logo embroidered on the pocket. His dark hair was slightly tousled, like he'd been running his hands through it while driving over. But what really caught me off guard were his eyes, a warm hazel that crinkled at the corners when he smiled and extended his hand. You must be Jake. I'm Mike. Heard you've got a sink that's causing some trouble? His handshake was firm, his hands calloused from work but surprisingly gentle. I noticed a small tattoo peeking out from under his sleeve, something geometric that I couldn't quite make out. I realized I was staring and quickly stepped aside to let him in. Yeah, it's in the kitchen. Thanks so much for coming so quickly. I've got quite the water feature happening in there, I said, trying to sound more composed than I felt. As I led him to the kitchen, I couldn't help but notice how he moved with a kind of casual confidence, toolbox in hand, like someone completely comfortable in his own skin. It was oddly mesmerizing. Mike set his toolbox down and immediately got to work assessing the situation. He knelt down to look under the sink, and I found myself awkwardly hovering nearby, not sure if I should offer help or give him space. So, how long have you been doing this? I asked, mainly to fill the silence. He glanced up with a half-smile. Officially? About 5 years. Unofficially? Since I was a kid helping my dad fix everything around our house. He was one of those people who never called a professional if he could figure it out himself. He turned back to the sink, adding, looks like your P-trap has come loose, and there's some corrosion on these fittings. Nothing too serious, though. I nodded like I understood what a P-trap was. That sounds fixable? I ventured. Mike laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to brighten the kitchen. Very fixable. I'll need to replace a couple of parts, but I've got everything in my truck. You're lucky you caught it early before it could do real damage to the cabinets. As he went out to his truck to get the parts, I found myself taking a deep breath. There was something about his presence that was both calming and unsettling. Calming because he clearly knew what he was doing, but unsettling because I was increasingly aware of how attractive I found him. It had been a while since someone had caught my attention so immediately. When Mike returned, he got to work in earnest. I offered him some water, which he accepted with a grateful smile. I couldn't help but notice how his forearms flexed as he worked with the wrench, or how he bit his lower lip slightly when concentrating on a particularly tricky part. It was oddly intimate, watching someone work so diligently in your space. So, do you live alone here? He asked casually as he removed the damaged section of pipe. Yeah, just me. I've been here about 2 years now, I replied, leaning against the counter at what I hoped was a casual distance. Nice place. Great natural light, he commented, glancing around. I'm always in and out of different homes, but I notice the ones that feel like someone really lives there, you know? You've got a good energy here. I felt a little flush of pride at that. Thanks. I try to make it homey. When I'm not dealing with plumbing emergencies, that is. He chuckled again, that warm sound that was becoming familiar. Everyone deals with plumbing emergencies. At least you called someone instead of making it worse with YouTube tutorials. You wouldn't believe how many disasters I've had to fix after people decided they were suddenly plumbers because of a 5-minute video. I laughed, feeling more at ease. I was tempted, but I know my limitations. Anything beyond changing a light bulb is pushing my DIY skills. Smart man, he said, glancing up at me with those crinkly-eyed smiles that were becoming more distracting by the minute. Self-awareness is underrated. As he continued working, our conversation flowed surprisingly easily. I learned that Mike had started his handyman business after working for a larger company and getting tired of their customer service policies. He wanted to be able to take his time with jobs, do them right, and build relationships with his clients. He lived about 20 minutes away with his dog, a rescue mutt named Edison. Because he lights up my life, Mike had explained with a slightly embarrassed grin that was utterly endearing. The repair was going smoothly, with Mike explaining what he was doing in terms I could actually understand. There was something deeply attractive about watching someone be completely competent at their craft. At one point, he asked me to hold a flashlight for him while he tightened something in a particularly dark corner of the cabinet. I knelt down beside him, acutely aware of how close we were, the scent of his subtle cologne mingling with the clean smell of the pipe sealant he was using. Perfect, just like that, he said softly as I adjusted the light. Our eyes met briefly in the confined space, and I felt a distinct shift in the atmosphere between us. There was a moment of silence that stretched just a beat too long to be casual, before he cleared his throat and turned back to the pipes. As he was finishing up, testing the water flow and checking for leaks, he seemed to be working up to saying something. He wiped his hands on a rag and stood up, looking at me with a slightly different expression than before, a bit more thoughtful, perhaps even a touch nervous. So, Jake, he began, leaning against the counter. I don't usually do this with clients, but, he paused, running a hand through his hair in that way I'd already noticed he did when thinking. I've got tickets to this local food festival happening this weekend. My friend bailed on me last minute. Would you be interested in being a good distraction from my disappointment? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized with a start that he was flirting with me. Had been flirting with me, probably, in his subtle way throughout the repair. I felt a rush of warmth spread through me, equal parts surprise and delight. A distraction, huh? I replied, trying to keep my voice casual despite the sudden acceleration of my heartbeat. Is that what you call all your potential dates? His smile widened, clearly pleased that I'd caught on and was playing along. Only the ones who look particularly distracting while holding flashlights in cramped kitchen cabinets. I laughed, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in months. Well, when you put it that way, how could I refuse? I happen to be excellent at being distracting. I had a feeling you might be, he said, his voice dropping slightly lower. So that's a yes? That's definitely a yes, I confirmed, surprised by my own boldness, but riding the wave of connection that had been building over the past hour. Mike's face lit up with genuine pleasure. Great. I can text you the details. He pulled out his phone, and we exchanged numbers. There was something sweetly old-fashioned about how carefully he entered my information, double-checking to make sure he had it right. As he packed up his tools, our conversation took on a new energy, more playful, more charged with possibility. He explained the work he'd done one more time, showing me what to watch for in the future, but there was a new undercurrent to his instructions. His hand brushed mine as he demonstrated how to check the connections, and neither of us pretended it was accidental. When it came time to pay for the repair, I reached for my wallet, but Mike hesitated. How about this, he suggested. You can pay for the parts today, and if the food festival goes well, You can get dinner next time. If it doesn't, then you can just Venmo me the labor cost later. His confidence was charming rather than presumptuous. Pretty sure of yourself, aren't you? I teased, even as I felt a flutter of anticipation at the mention of next time. Not at all, he replied with surprising sincerity. Just hopeful, and willing to take a chance on that distraction we talked about. After settling the payment for the parts, Mike packed up the last of his tools. At the door, there was that moment of uncertainty that comes at the end of a first meeting, not quite a date, but somehow more than a simple service call. He extended his hand, and when I took it, he held on just a second longer than necessary. I'll text you about Saturday, he said. And even if your sink gives you any more trouble before then, feel free to call. Repeat customers get priority service. The way he said it made it clear he wasn't just talking about plumbing. I'll keep that in mind, I replied, matching his tone. Though I'm hoping my sink behaves itself for a while. Fair enough, he laughed. See you Saturday, Jake. After he left, I stood in my kitchen, looking at the perfectly repaired sink. The apartment felt different somehow, charged with possibility in a way it hadn't been before. I ran the water, watching it flow smoothly down the drain, and found myself smiling like an idiot. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a text. Just checking that your sink is still behaving itself. Also, the food festival starts at 1 p.m. on Saturday, if that works for you. They have everything from gourmet tacos to artisanal ice cream. Thought you should know what you're getting yourself into. Mike. I felt that same flutter of excitement as I typed back. Sink is perfect. 1 p.m. works great. I'm particularly distracting when there's ice cream involved, just so you're prepared. His response came quickly. Consider me warned and looking forward to it. That night, as I got ready for bed, I couldn't help but reflect on how differently my day had turned out than I'd expected. What had started as a plumbing disaster had somehow transformed into the most promising connection I'd felt with someone in longer than I could remember. There was something refreshingly straightforward about Mike. He saw something he was interested in and didn't play games about it. In a dating world often filled with ambiguity and second-guessing, his clarity was like a breath of fresh air. I wondered what Saturday would bring, trying not to get too ahead of myself, but unable to stop replaying our interactions. The way he'd looked at me when asking if I'd be a good distraction, the confidence in his smile that suggested he already knew the answer, the genuine interest in his questions about my life, going beyond the polite small talk you'd expect from someone fixing your sink. As I drifted off to sleep, I found myself oddly grateful for my plumbing emergency. Sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most interesting journeys. And while I had no idea where this particular journey might lead, I was suddenly very much looking forward to finding out. Sometimes a broken sink is just a broken sink. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's the universe's peculiar way of bringing the right person to your door exactly when you need them most, not just to fix your plumbing, but perhaps to fix something else you didn't even realize was broken. Saturday couldn't come fast enough, and for the first time in a long while, I was excited about the possibilities that tomorrow might bring. All because a handsome handyman had asked if I'd be a good distraction while standing in my kitchen, fixing the sink I'd never been more thankful to see break. Total _char_count, 17,876.